there is actually a fair amount of liquidity in the country, right? And then there's plenty of money in the local banking system. Should the government be, say, borrowing, or issuing, say, government securities, getting some money and then spending it, Dr. A?
Yeah, I think in terms
and how
of
much can it go to, in terms of borrowings?
Yeah, I think in terms of financing, Malaysia is in a very strong position in the sense that we are a resource surplus country. Our current account surplus is estimated at 15 to 16% of GDP. That amounts to about 90 to 100 billion a year. So given this so-called excess savings over investment, domestic financing is not an issue. I think whether it's either requirements by the private sector or the government. I think government, that level is also current at just slightly above 40% of GDP. So that's still what you call a low, moderately indebted country. So I think capability to borrow, capability to finance the deficit is not an issue, I think. And then more importantly, under the current global credit crunch, it's important to look inwards, to look at domestic sources of financing, and this is a ready source of non-inflationary financing for the government. So I think from a financing perspective, Malaysia is well insulated from the current global financial turmoil.
I think following on from Dr. Ye, if I may, I mean, government borrowing money for fiscal priming is one thing, but I think the government also has to ensure, especially the central bank, that the banks in Malaysia continues to lend, especially during this time. And you're right, we do have liquidity. We haven't got a liquidity problem here. Our loans to deposit ratio is about 80%. And it was very good actually for Bank Negara with the other central banks to be preemptive in terms of guaranteeing deposits, or foreign currency as well as all types of deposits here, in order to ensure that there was not going to be a run in terms of banking deposits. I think all of that is actually, again, it wasn't all announced yesterday, but it has been a series of announcements generally which should be taken as a whole, which generally has been pretty positive.
We'll come back to that one on bank lending. We'll just examine that in a bit more detail after that. But before that, I would like to ask Tan Sri, I mean, how much do you think the government should have spent?
Actually, I can't disagree with Dr. Ye or Johan. And they've come out very strongly and very solidly on this, on the analysis. But I think it's a question of philosophy. It's a question of strategy. I mean, you'll have to look at it in the political economic sense, not narrowly economic. Here we have a situation where you have a new Prime Minister emerging. We have a situation where we really don't know where the world economy is going. It could be a U rather than a V. I agree with Dr. Ye, but it could be a long base, And so if you want to wait, and we have gone through this before, these kind of recessions and the way we've handled it. And I recall many times in the past where we said wait and see, and then it gets worse. And once it gets worse, it's very hard to handle. So I would have thought it would have been more anticipatory, and this would have been a good opportunity for the Prime Minister in waiting to come out assertively, aggressively, and to really remove the uncertainty that there is. I think people are happy with what has come out, but we are not quite sure, given the world uncertainty and the outlook and what is going to happen here with funds going out. All this is indications of lack of confidence. Partly it's the politicking that has been going on.
The funds going out, a lot of that could be selling, equity selling, John. I mean, a lot of equity sales have been taking place.
It was a combination of two, actually. I mean, number one, it was due to fundamental reasons, a lot of downgrades in terms of GDP, global GDP expectations, as well as corporate earnings. But at the same time, it was driven by fear. And a lot of that technically also was sparked by a lot of forced selling by hedge funds, because a lot of banks were generally withdrawing their credit lines, so they had no choice but to sell.
We've been looking at some of the stories recently. There's been some amount of strengthening of the ringgit. The ringgit is finally beginning to find a sort of like a base against the US dollar, and it seems to be consolidating, which is an indication that the outflows seem to have like eased. There seemed to be some indication that the outflows were largely because of foreign funds selling out and repatriating the funds. So I don't know whether do you all think that confidence is a major issue?
Confidence is a major issue.
What
it
areas
is being caused by the politicking, the political uncertainty. I mean, these are real factors. Businessmen, they get very uncomfortable. I work in a corporate, and you get the sense that, well, look, what's going to happen, you know. So, and the investment opportunities here have been limited. The allocation of projects have been a problem. The implementation capacity has been a problem. So with all these kind of bottlenecks, they take the money out and they're investing outside. Now this is not good for the country in the long term. So today we may be good, and I think our fundamentals, we all agree, are pretty strong. But fundamentals like health in an individual, you know, can suddenly go awry. You know? So there must be some sustained effort to ensure continuing confidence or stronger confidence, and looking at the economy not today but in the longer term. So the budgets are not necessarily required just for the year. It sets the pace, the tone for a future sustainability, and I think that has been lacking.
Or set the tone for a future Prime Minister even?
Why not? True. And now that you got a more sophisticated electorate, they will be watching. And they say, all right, 7 billion, and 7 billion out of what? The budget is about 200 billion, yeah? So,
but don't you think the political environment has improved somewhat? There is there seems to be a clear direction as to who's going to be the next Prime Minister. And then the talk of a PKR coalition, Pakatan Rakyat, forming the next government seems to have like faded away for the time being, and it seems to have, things seem to have settled. What are your comments?
Settled for the time being superficially. I think underlying all this, and I want to make this a strong point, if there's any value added I can give to these two experts, is corporate governance.
Absolutely.
We can be spending 7 billion or 14 billion, but if it's in the public mind going to be wasted through corruption, through inefficiency, through giving the wrong contracts to the wrong guys, it means nothing. And some people who are a bit critical will say, well, this is good to give all this money to a lot of small contractors, because they're all little projects coming up. There are no mega projects, to be fair. And it depends who you give it to. And if you don't get a good cost benefit return, I think that is again going to erode confidence. So I'm not happy with, I'm happy with the stabilization plan, but not too happy with the amount, because I think there are lots of imponderables.
Should you think it should be doubled?
Well, it could have been much more. You know. I mean, when you talk about
increased by 50%?
anti-cyclical measures that were introduced earlier, we still, what is the final outcome? We are thinking of a 3%, 4% growth rate for next year, 2008-9. This is what the budget says.
Or could the government be saving some ammunition for the future, further down
you
the line?
could, but I think we still got some leeway, you know, the fundamentals are strong. So when we can be more bold, why not be more bold when you're strong, not when you're weak? So it's arguable. As Johan says, it's a balancing act. I just think the equilibrium has not been just quite right. They may have to come up again with a supplement soon if they find the world economic situation is getting worse.